This has never been an international relations channel, but today is different. Today we saw a single man wield his military power to attack a young budding democracy in an attempt to depose its government. Some tried to brush it off with whataboutism by pointing to past events in history in order to somehow distribute the blame for this horrific event across all of humanity. That's a feeble-minded attempt to avoid the necessity of confronting a single bad man waging a war of choice against democracy out of nostalgia and yearning for a lost empire and a desire to preserve his own despotic power in the face of spreading democracy.
Spremite se. Idemo!
Big thanks to Sasha for the Ready Let's Go today. We're going to talk a little bit about the tragedy in Ukraine. Then we'll come back to Cardano and discuss some interesting highlights from the February Cardano 360. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get something straight. Nobody starts out trying to become Neville Chamberlain, but as we found out in the 1930s, the road to hell on earth is in fact paved with bricks made of appeasement. Be aware, we are dealing with a character who seems to care only about two things: a nostalgia and a yearning to rebuild this former empire, and a personal desire to stay in power at all costs, which is slightly problematic if most of the rest of the world, including Freedom House here, would rank the elections that keep you in power as a 0 out of 4 in terms of them being free and fair, and would also rank the elections of your legislative representatives as a 0 out of 4 in terms of freedom and fairness. How is this a problem for an authoritarian regime, you might ask? Well, it's especially a problem if your very closest neighbor is a budding young democracy and they're having elections that the rest of the world sees something like this. Was the current head of government or other chief national authority elected through free and fair elections? Not a 0 out of 4, but a 4 out of 4. Were the current national legislative representatives elected through free and fair elections? 3 out of 4. This is a problem because your citizens will eventually notice, and they'll realize that they could possibly elect their representatives and leaders in free and fair democratic elections as well. This isn't good for preservation of your rule. So if you're this authoritarian, non-democratically elected leader, what do? Well, if that neighboring country is also one of the big puzzle pieces you would need to rebuild the old empire, you do exactly what you would have done in the old days. You invade that country, try to depose that democratically elected government, and you try to cover your tracks by lying. You tell your own people, hey, that government, they're Nazis. And you tell this lie even if the leader of that democratically elected government is a Jewish man. This is one of those times where we all have to choose. You can choose to support those modern day Neville Chamberlains who will happily go down the road of appeasement because it's easier, or you can choose to support those leaders who would stand up against authoritarianism. I know what that means for me, and I hope you do too. Just for the record, I know Charles is making a video about Ukraine right now. I haven't watched it yet. I think he's broadcasting right as I'm recording. I'm going to watch it after this. Just thought I'd mention that because I know someone will ask me. Finally, there are reports. True or false, I don't know, but there are reports of a Ukrainian Fulcrum pilot. A Fulcrum is a MiG-29. A Ukrainian Fulcrum pilot who has single-handedly downed several Russian fighters. Again, I don't know if this is true, but they're calling this person or his plane or some combination thereof the Ghost of Kyiv. This could be a real person or it could just be an idea. But either way, my thoughts are with you as you fight for the freedom of your people, Ghost. Okay, back to crypto, guys. Today was also the February Cardano 360, and it was another good one. Triple H plus John Woods, plus Roman Pellerin, plus many others. We started out with John Woods, who ran us through some important pieces of the February release. He said data structure optimizations will mean that less RAM is required to run the node, whether you're running it as dataless or through the CLI. The new format will also allow for users to construct multi-sig transactions that can be signed incrementally. We'll also get the slot leadership schedule. An important note here is that SPOs will only get to check when they are slot leader, not others. So there won't be any impact on security. I know people had been speculating about that on social media. Obviously, we don't want the entire world to know who the slot leader is because then they could attack that stake pool. Local mempool monitoring will also become available. So devs will be able to follow the journey of transactions from wallet to block. Script cost estimation in the CLI will also allow for developers to better understand the efficiency of their scripts or smart contracts, as you might think of them. They're also going to increase Plutus resources and transactions per block. John then reviewed that this year they've made blocks 25% bigger, allowed Plutus scripts to use 24% more resources per block, and 40% more resources per transaction. Next up, Nigel took us through 17 major categories of deliveries we can look forward to at this point. I'm going to buzz through these really quickly because a lot of them we've talked about before, but not all of them. As far as core network improvements, he talked about continuous performance improvements via network parameter updates. The UTXO HD project, I don't know if we've talked about this. This will mean we will now move to a system of storing ledger state on a mixture of RAM and hard drives. Rob Grieg's comment during the live stream the other night foreshadowed the necessity for something like this. Number 3, P2P work to introduce a dynamic topology to make for more efficient connection between nodes and better decentralization. Number 4, smaller things like library optimization. In the realm of applications and smart contracts, we have number 5, Plutus certification. Number 6, developer community support. One new strategy will be that whenever they introduce a new feature, it will be tested in a DApp and actually used in a DApp when it hits the network. Number 7, Hydra, which of course is the L2. Number 8 is Mithril, which we've covered on this channel multiple times. It'll improve network sync times. Number 9 is sidechains, which are also a network optimization if we can offload some of the mainnet traffic to these sidechains. Number 10 is dataless improvements to the UI and to sync times for dataless. Number 11 is a voting center. Number 12 is an NFT center. Number 13 is Cardano wallet enhancements building on multi-sig. Number 14 is the DApp Store beta. I know we're all very interested in that. Number 15 is a lot of work to do on governance features. Number 16, decentralized decision-making across the whole network. And number 17, Catalyst will continue rolling out different funds. John Woods then came back to tell us about what would happen in the June upgrade window. He explained that pipelining is really the coalescing of verification and propagation of blocks. He said nodes will no longer have to do a full verification of a block before they pass it to another node. Instead, there will be a mechanism for nodes to pass blocks to each other safely before full verification without jeopardizing security. John says this will give us huge headroom to scale further going forward and describes it as a huge milestone. This is one of the better explanations of pipelining I've heard. In a bit of a surprise, John also announced that network parameters have improved so much already that script compression will no longer be needed and would basically be obsolete with pipelining and input endorsers. Completing Triple H, Kevin Hammond then came on to give us a rundown of SIPs 31 through 33, which we've covered before on this channel. He talked about SIP 33 reference scripts. He said, scripts right now might be somewhere in the 14 to 16 KB range. And with SIP 33, they will shrink down to something comparatively very tiny since we're just reusing the same scripts. And this will result in users paying much less to run a script on chain. He said concurrency will be addressed by reference inputs in SIP 31. Instead of having to spend UTXOs to use them as inputs, you can just reference them. So many different transactions can use the same input concurrently. SIP 32 inline datums will help to cut the cost of having to hash datums when they are something simple like an integer. I'm not going to go into much more detail here on those three SIPs since we've talked about them before multiple times on the channel. Next up was Shahaf Bar Geffen, CEO and co-founder of Coty, to give us an update on Djed. He said integration of backend and front end is almost done, including implementation of NAMI compatibility and integration with the Djed contract. They're focused on security right now. They expect to go to testnet in March and then on to the third-party audit. Mainnet might happen 6 to 8 weeks after testnet. Shahaf indicated that they've paid a lot of attention to things like the wormhole exploit. He listed the huge number of partnerships they have for Djed. Shen is something new he introduced. He said Shen is the name of the reserve coin. We'd kind of been wondering what they were going to call that. This is a term that also comes from ancient Egyptian. While Djed represents stability, Shen represents prosperity. This next segment was kind of unexpected, but I loved it because it was about the metaverse. Roman Pellerin thinks of the metaverse as the connection between different universes in the sense that Cardano and Ethereum and Facebook might each be different universes, but the metaverse could be used as a sort of glue to do things like attach an NFT to the decentralized identity of an owner and display that across different universes. So the metaverse would connect these different universes and allow for consistent display of things like NFTs and anything else you could attach to an identity, basically. Roman has some very nuanced thoughts about the first expression of the metaverse. Maybe just being something like the VR Decentraland type experience with lands and NFTs. But later, more sophisticated manifestations would be something like a more complicated cosmos of different universes. From Roman's perspective, this means that no one centralized entity or company could own the actual metaverse. The metaverse itself is sort of the interoperability protocol as opposed to the actual spaces. I would liken this to a sort of what is the internet type perspective on the metaverse. When you ask somebody what is the internet and supply them with enough information to actually reach the conclusion, they'll eventually get to the conclusion that the internet is not the websites, it's not email, it's not chat, it's not all of the platforms. It's not Facebook or Google or anything like that. It's actually the protocol that allows all of those things to exist that isn't owned by Google or Facebook or Apple or anybody else. Roman further explained that he thinks there are three main Cardano metaverse components. One, a native asset standard. Two, smart contracts so that the NFTs can evolve. And three, digital identity so that we have something to attach to the NFTs. Roman feels this is a digital transformation that goes well beyond the blockchain. It's about no single company owning the connected silos and the applications being owned by their actual users, which is the kind of language we're very accustomed to and we love in crypto and blockchain because the decentralization kind of underpins everything for us. You'll notice there are several different strands of thought, even just about the nomenclature, this label, metaverse. There's sort of this strain of thought that the metaverse is a description of a protocol, and there's necessarily implied in that interoperability. And that makes sense. If you think about the metaverse in terms of it being maybe some kind of successor to the internet, that makes perfect sense. You'll also notice that there are people, and I definitely fall into this camp quite often. I might describe a metaverse. And to me, these 3D or seemingly 3D immersive spaces where people can do the same things with each other that they would do online. To me, that could even be a metaverse if there was no real implied interoperability. If I went into a metaverse like that, and as I was able to have the same kind of discourse with people that I might otherwise have, on Twitter or in Discord or something like that, you'll probably find me using the phrase metaverse, calling that a metaverse, even if there's no interoperability. But I like the idyllic idea of the metaverse being kind of this protocol substrate that creates interoperability between all of these immersive spaces. That's certainly a more idealistic sounding future. but I think I'll have a very hard time myself personally not calling even a non-interoperable immersive 3D space where I can do a lot of my normal internet activities in the future. But regardless of all that, I am with Roman. We need to definitely keep pushing toward decentralization to make sure that whatever we call the metaverse or a metaverse is necessarily not something owned by a single company and actually owned by the users. Next up, Joshua Miller came on to talk to us about NFTs and the metaverse. I don't know what it is, but Joshua Miller has always kind of reminded me of a young Mike Posner, before all the fame got to him. Joshua talked about the metaverse as an e-commerce platform. He was asked about whether or not he was privy to any big deals coming to Cardano, and he said, "We're going to see some really interesting things just in the coming weeks." I thought this was an interesting comment. He also mentioned that there's no reason that you couldn't bring anything from your real life into the digital world, and that things like marketing campaigns and brand targeting by real world brands could be something we see more and more of. I think he's right. I think this will be a really big trend. I hope you are getting ready for what turns out to be a fantastic weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. Don't support modern day Neville Chamberlains.